Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
I'm Mike Polk Jr. You're probably wondering, why do you guys normally on a little earlier than this? What's the deal?
Yeah, it's been a big week. There's been a lot going on, and President Joe Biden just addressed the country from the Oval Office, so we didn't want to step on that, so we pushed things back a little bit, and we figured we'd let you hear that speech now, so here it is in full.
I'm speaking to you tonight from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. In this sacred space, I'm surrounded by portraits of extraordinary American presidents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that. And I never have. I've made it clear that I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. America's going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe I know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people. And I know this. We are a great nation because we are good people. When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth. And the truth, the sacred cause of this country, is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause, cherish it so much, a cause of American democracy itself, must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose. I'll keep calling out hate and extremism. Make it clear there is no place in America for political violence or any violence ever, period. I'm going to keep speaking out to protect our kids from gun violence, our planet from climate crisis that is the existential threat. And I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot so we can end cancer as we know it, because we can do it. And I'm going to call for Supreme Court reform because this is critical to our democracy, Supreme Court reform. You know, I will keep working to ensure America remains strong and secure and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world. You know, we've come so far since my inauguration. On that day, I told you, as I stood in that winter, we stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities. Peril and possibilities. We were in the grip of the worst pandemic in the century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. But we came together as Americans, and we got through it. We emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Today we have the strongest economy in the world, creating nearly 16 million new jobs, a record. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in 20 years. We're literally rebuilding our entire nation, urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities. Manufacturing has come back to America. We're leading the world again in chips and science and innovation. We finally beat Big Pharma after all these years to lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we lower the cost for everyone, not just seniors. More people have health care today in America than ever before. And I signed one of the most significant laws helping millions of veterans and their families who are exposed to toxic materials. You know, the most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office. I've kept my commitment to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I also kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and be a president for all Americans. That's what I've done. I ran for president 4 years ago because I believed and still do that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake. And that's still the case. America's an idea. An idea stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It's the most powerful idea in the history of the world. That idea is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've never fully lived up to it, to this sacred idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I do not believe the American people will walk away from it now. In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people. When you make that choice, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin hanging on my wall here in the Oval Office, alongside the busts of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Cesar Chavez. When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders have given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. Nowhere else on earth could a kid with a stutter from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claremont, Delaware, one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. But here I am. That's what's so special about America. We're a nation of promise and possibilities, of dreamers and doers, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. I've given my heart and my soul to our nation, like so many others. I've been blessed a million times in return with the love and support of the American people. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith, and remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
That was President Joe Biden coming to us from the Oval Office just about an hour ago.
I like that our little logo thing ran after it, so it looked like we presented that speech. That's what it looked like to me, anyways.
Presented by Ohio Has Issues.
So that is, I didn't hear anything totally surprising there. It's about what we expected, I think. Did you notice anything about that you want to? I know that Ohio has issues. We're supposed to be talking about state politics, but this affects us all. The vice presidential candidate for the Republicans is from Ohio. We have an important Senate race coming up that could determine the balance of the Senate. So all of this stuff affects us. So what did you take from that?
Yeah, it's a major moment. You know, I noticed right at the beginning of the speech there, he was calling for fresh, younger voices, and then towards the end of the speech, he brought Vice President Kamala Harris into it, who is a great deal younger than the current President Joe Biden, and she is the presumptive Democratic nominee. So he made a point there of thanking her for her service. I also thought, you know, predictably, he spent time talking about his accomplishments in office and then his goals for the rest of his term. One thing that I took particular interest in was his mention that he would be working on reforming the Supreme Court during the remainder of his time in office, which is something, you know, controversial. There are a lot of people for and against it, and be interested to see what that looks like.
That surprised me too, because this didn't seem like the kind of speech where that would be have to be mentioned. And I'm not saying it's not important, but it tells you what a priority that must be for them, because that's valuable airtime right there during a very important speech, and for them to devote a little bit of time to it, even that just means that they've got their eye on that. Overall, I thought that it was interesting that he never once mentioned Donald Trump's name.
That is interesting.
Never mentioned Republican or Democrat. Never said, I don't believe. I don't think he ever mentioned party. It seemed like he was trying, you know, he was going, if you recall, before he decided to step down, a lot of his speeches were getting a little fiery, and he wasn't saying, darn those Republicans who are acting like this. He would say, darn MAGA. He picked out a part of the Republican Party to try and separate that, what he considers to be the extremist part, from the more sensible part. But you didn't hear MAGA, and you didn't hear him saying, he wasn't talking about how the other side is trying to burn the world down or anything like that. It felt like he was really trying to make it a broad message where he's saying, you know, everyone's welcome right now, and who knows if that'll change, and I don't know if it'll be effective. But it was interesting to see him just out there for really the first time being a messenger for Kamala Harris, and not much mention of her.
No, just a moment there, and kind of implied and calling for the younger, fresher voices. I think, you know, the former President Donald Trump at 78 years old now is the sole title of the oldest Democrat, the oldest presidential candidate.
Yes, and I think part of that also is, remember, Kamala's not the nominee yet for the Democrats, you know, so she's presumptive, but I think he probably still wants to respect that process. That's not a done deal. So if he went on and just screamed about her bona fides, then it would seem presumptuous at this point.
So that was a lockdown shot of the current President Joe Biden. I can tell you from the White House poll, this note was posted on X that his daughter Ashley Biden and his wife Dr. Jill Biden were in the room towards the end of it. It says here that Ashley Biden reached for the hand of her mother, and then Jill Biden walked toward the desk as he was kind of closing things up there. So we didn't see that, but they were in the room.
What's going to be interesting is this is the first of probably many speeches to come where he's supporting her and going out and advocating for her. And this isn't something that normally happens, obviously. Somebody who's still in office, a president who's still in office, doesn't normally go out and have the opportunity to go out and campaign. I know it came under weird circumstances, but it's like it's an extra kind of weapon in a way, but also it doesn't necessarily, I'm not even saying it'll necessarily be all positive. Last approval rating from Gallup that they had on Joe Biden in the country, and this is before he announced that he was stepping down, he was at 36% of people said they approve of his handling of his role as president, which is not high. It's quite low. So I'm not just assuming, and I don't think anybody should assume, that him going out and advocating and stumping for her is necessarily going to be 100% positive. But you know, he can now go to when they're doing their convention, he can do a speech there, he can travel around and in acting as president, be out there being presidential and essentially campaigning for her while she's also campaigning for herself. And that's going to be probably a useful, at least, option for them.
It's a different dynamic, for sure. One other thing that I wanted to note before we moved on is that right at the beginning, he said he loved the office of the presidency, that he loves the country more. And that's something that we saw a lot of people saying in their reactions to him announcing that he was stepping aside as the Democratic presumptive presidential candidate. So now let's hear from two Ohio political leaders who had reactions. First, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. He reacted to this and he said, quote, "I have known President Biden since 1995 when I entered the U.S. Senate and served with him on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Fran and I wish President Biden and the First Lady all the best as he serves out the remainder of his term and in the years ahead."
And we also have a quote from Elizabeth Walters, the Ohio Democratic Party chair, upon President Biden announcing he will not be running for president any longer. "Today, I am deeply grateful for President Biden's service to our country. His 4 years in office will be remembered as one of the most successful presidencies of all time, delivering real change for Ohioans that will be felt long after he leaves office."
And with that, we will get back to the regular business of Ohio Has Issues, because there are going to be some waves that are felt from this. This is massive news. It's going to impact all of politics, and Ohio is no exception to that. So with him stepping down, Vice President Kamala Harris becomes the presumptive Democratic nominee. We'll talk a little bit more about what that process is going to look like. But our main topic today is, how does this impact Ohio, and how does this impact Ohio's Senate race, which is a very important race this year?
Super important race, and who better to ask than our friend Joe Ingles. This is her first time on the show. She's the senior reporter at Statehouse News Bureau, and she does great work all the time for you as citizens of Ohio, covering Ohio politics. And we wanted to find out what this could mean for this very important Senate race and what she's been learning from her sources.
So we will have her on later in the show.
Oh, yeah,
and
it's going to happen.
In addition to that, not right now.
I love that you clean me up.
We have quite a bit to get to before that. Quite a bit to get to.
You're so quick, too.
You gotta be quick on the draw.
I know.
We are also going to hear from the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law election law director Edward Foley, and we'll speak with him
now. No?
Not right now.
Not right
now.
now.
No.
That's later,
A little bit later.
Whenever something is gonna come,
called a tease.
Whenever something's gonna come and it's time to pitch to something, will you like tap me on the arm and be like, now, and then I'll pitch to it? Thank you.
I will. I'll give you a little pinch on the back of the arm.
Okay, so whenever it's time.
I will. And we're going to hear, of course, from Senator Sherrod Brown and candidate Bernie Marino on what they're saying about this move.
They did not talk to us, but we got their quotes.
Yeah, they did.
Just to be clear.
Post on social media.
What if you saw them back behind us drinking coffee, just waiting to talk? They're just like, is it our turn? How much longer? No, it's just, we got their quotes.
Shocking.
Yeah.
That would be shocking. But first, in our Ohio Roundup, there's a potential conversation out there happening about whether this move could affect the current Republican vice presidential candidate. You know him as your Ohio Senator, J.D. Vance. So that brings us to our Ohio Roundup. The question here is, will J.D. Vance continue on as the vice presidential candidate with former President Donald Trump?
Because some people are second guessing this at this point from what we're seeing online. A lot of people are saying maybe this wasn't such a hot idea.
Yeah, Tim Alberta, who is a reporter for The Atlantic, tweeted this.
Most striking thing I heard from Trump allies yesterday was the second guessing of J.D. Vance, a selection they acknowledge that was born of cockiness, meant to run up margins with the base in a blowout rather than persuade swing voters in a nail-biter.
So that was in an article that he published in The Atlantic that was talking about what kind of impact this would have for the Republican race for the presidency. You know, the article talks about how the Trump campaign up to this point was actually optimized to beat Joe Biden. So I do want to point out here, I tried to reach J.D. Vance's campaign about this. So here's the part where I tell you all the ways that I tried to reach J.D. Vance's
Always my
campaign.
favorite. Go ahead.
All the ways that I tried to reach him. So I tried to reach J.D. Vance's campaign last week on a separate story that was about a claim he made at the RNC about how Ohioans are about $10,000 poorer, their families are this year than they were 4 years ago. So to do that, I reached out to the press email that I have for him. I didn't get a response to that. So today, I went to the internet.
Uh-oh.
And I called all of his Senate offices, all of them except for Toledo. He has an office in Washington, D.C.
Why did you not call Toledo, just out of curiosity? Why did you draw the line there?
Because Middletown picked up the phone.
Oh, good.
So that is why I did not call Toledo.
All right.
And
Otherwise, we would have had to try to get him on LinkedIn.
that's right. But I did talk to a wonderful person at the Middletown office for the senator. Now, this is his Senate office, mind you. This is not his campaign office.
Right.
Now, what they told me in Middletown was that they don't have the direct contact information for his campaign as of yet.
His Senate doesn't.
His Senate office does not, and they keep that separate, so I don't know if that's a usual move, but regardless, they
Those
didn't have it.
to be remain separate, right? Legally? Does
I'm
anyone
sure,
know?
I'm sure they
Okay,
have
good.
to remain separate. Obviously, your
Yeah, they
Senate
do.
office can't be doing campaigning for you, but I thought they might be able to give me the email
You
or
would
the
think.
phone number.
Maybe it's
you
a
know,
violation of some sort.
something more direct. In any case, they sent me to the Republican Party office for Butler County, who I called
Okay.
and emailed, spoke with Linda there. Linda was super helpful, so I sent an email on to Linda. Linda promised me she would send it up the chain to the higher-ups in the Republican Party.
Thanks, Linda.
Appreciate you, Linda. And then, later in the afternoon, his Washington, D.C. office got back to me for the Senate seat. And they said, again, we don't have that contact information, which I thought was interesting, but they did direct me to a different press email for his Senate seat and thought maybe they could be helpful in some certain way. So I emailed a different press email for his Senate seat. They also did not get back to me. So if I get a response, you will hear it.
At this point, does part of you feel like maybe they're just giving you the runaround?
Well, I'm having
not assume.
deja vu of being ghosted, and you know,
Yeah, I understand.
I'm doing what I can.
Let's
I'm
not
doing what
assume.
I can.
But thank you
Yeah.
for putting in the work.
Yeah. So
Appreciate that.
we want to reach out on that, obviously, but that's what we saw reporting in The Atlantic is there were people close to the Trump campaign who were saying maybe they're second guessing the situation because it was just a different place. All right, moving on to the next topic in our Ohio roundup.
Oh, we're going to talk about our Ohio State Senator George Lang and his unfortunate Civil War comment, which he has apologized for. A little background?
Yeah, so first we're going to read the apology because we want you to know where things stand now, but this is also related to J.D. Vance. The comments were originally made at a rally for J.D. Vance, but here's what he said later that night. Quote, remarks I made earlier today at a rally in Middletown do not accurately reflect my views. I regret the divisive remarks I made in the excitement of the moment on stage, especially in light of the assassination attempt of President Trump last week. We should all be mindful of what is said at political events. So,
Now, what was the original thing that he had to apologize for? Just remind everybody, I forget.
well, let's play the tape. Here's what it was.
Trump and Butler County's J.D. Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind. And if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Schmitty and the Bikers for Trump on our side.
Those were the comments that he made there. So, fiery words. He did walk them back, but they were said. And that particular video, that's just one. The clips were all over social media. That one was viewed at least more than 4 million times. That's when I took a screen grab this afternoon.
And see, that's the problem, is they were. In fact, I saw it, I believe, did the president himself reference this?
Yes.
He did. So that's how big this was, the fact that That's how fiery that rhetoric was, that it went pretty viral, to the fact that the President of the United States actually mentioned it and used it as an example of the kind of rhetoric that we should not be using. It is, of course, good that he apologized. However, I will say that his apology, I don't know where else it went, but I know it went on his X account. And this is the problem with this. Like, you saw it, 4 million people had seen that. And so that's the problem. The apology that he put up, he has 2,689 Twitter followers, X followers, and his apology.
I think scroll up a little bit.
Oh, there it is. Where is it? Let's see. What's the like section? Or where are we? There it is.
There
oh,
it
I
is.
see. Has 194 likes. So it doesn't match up. Like, the problem is the apology, much like sometimes a retraction in a newspaper after a newspaper gets something wrong, or heaven forbid a TV station might get something wrong, as if that would ever happen. But in that case, the retraction doesn't get nearly as much attention as the original event, and we know how many million people saw his call to arms, and we know how many people
In that video alone.
and we know how many people. Yes, and we know how many people saw his Comic Sans apology.
The font was questionable. Let's just be honest. The
Not
font was
great.
questionable. So the point of this is, if you saw that post, if you shared it without context, maybe make note of the fact that he did walk that back and said that he was not actually meaning to make that. Whether, we can't be in his mind at the time that he made those comments, but he walked it back. So he says he's not calling for civil war. So let people know that.
Look, we've all slipped up, I guess. That's bad. It's bad. It's a bad thing.
It's bad.
It's a bad thing. What's
It's
next?
bad. Okay, so there is an exciting update for the people behind the redistricting amendment.
Oh, yeah.
This is backed by the group Citizens Not Politicians. So, always a good thing to support something getting on the ballot. We do know that has been certified by the Secretary of State, and it will be on the ballot in November.
Just a reminder, that is the ballot amendment that will help fix, hopefully, the way that we seat, or we gerrymander not gerrymander, the way we distribute our districts. Right now, we are badly gerrymandered, and not even close to being representative of what the balance of the state is politically. And this happens all across the country. If a party is in power, they tend to take advantage of it if we allow them to. It's not by any means, it's not just one party that does this, but in our state, it happens to be one part of the party that's in power, as within most states. And the only remedy for this that some states have found is just finding a way so that the politicians are not choosing their own districts, but that the actual voters are choosing their politicians.
So here's a little background on this. So the Brennan Center of Justice at New York University Law School does support this amendment, but here's some information from them. They said going into the 2024 election, about 77% of Ohioans live in districts where elections for state representatives are not in serious dispute. Think about that. 77% of Ohioans living in districts where the result is kind of already foretold based on the district lines.
Yeah, so if you already know that you've got a slam dunk, where is your motivation to compromise? Where's your motivation to try and be moderate and try and win people over, when really your only threat ever, if you want to hang on to your seat, is somebody being more extreme than you because you are in a gerrymandered district? See the problem?
Yeah, so the Secretary of State announced this week that it has been certified, the amendment that will change that to be on the November ballot. They needed more than 413,000 signatures from at least 44 of the 88 counties in Ohio. The petitioners got 535,000 signatures in 58 counties.
Yeah, it's a pretty popular concept. And so that probably helped a lot. Remember when they were trying to get the weed amendment on for like 3 different times? And I know, I see. And we got the weed district on like 3 different times, but they kept like messing up. There's like, we spaced again. That happened for a couple of years, but it eventually passed. And one day, we're going to get that recreational marijuana that we voted for.
It's coming soon. It's coming soon, folks.
We got a
now,
tweet
our
here.
friend
Yeah,
of
Andrew
the show,
Tobias.
Andrew Tobias, tweeted about this. So this is some interesting information. So we want to share those posts from him.
Here's what he said. Citizens, not politicians, turned in 731,306 voter signatures earlier this month, of which 535,005 were found valid by election officials. That's a 73% validity rate, which is quite high, according to Andrew Tobias, and shows how sophisticated these ballot issue campaigns have gotten. And Andrew would know if they are.
He went on to say,
the rule of thumb used to be that campaigns should submit twice as many signatures as they needed, which in other words assumes a 50% validity rate. That's no longer the case if the campaign collecting them is well funded and knows what they're doing.
So they had a very high validity right there was the point. So they didn't need to collect double the amount. They were able to collect less because they were confident in their signature gathering.
They had a very strong backing, and they were pretty financially well-heeled too, because again, it's a very popular issue. Reminder, it was led by two different former Supreme Court justices, Ohio Supreme Court justices, a Republican and a Democrat.
Yeah.
Biggest advocates for the whole thing.
Who have both been on our show. Thank
Yes,
you
they
very
have.
much for being part of it, ladies.
Yep.
We appreciate it. So now the constitutional amendment has to be considered at an Ohio ballot board meeting that hasn't been scheduled yet to consider the ballot language and title, but no foreseen issues there, so
All right.
procedural.
Okay, so let's give them a quick update on the Senate race. It's, of course, this new development from President Joe Biden not running. That obviously is going to have some effect.
Sure, it is. So we're going to get to that element of it in a minute. There are two other topics for the Senate race that are unrelated to that we want to give you a quick update on first. Your current Senator, Sherrod Brown, had some news this week that he wanted to share about an American flag bill. So he tweeted about that very excitedly because
That is a lot of flag emojis.
it is a lot of flag emojis.
I won't say it's excessive. It's just very patriotic.
Well, it's very apropos for the topic.
He said, update, our bill just passed the House and is on its way to the president's desk to become law. From now on, all American flags bought by the government will be 100% made in America by American workers.
So it was the All-American Flag Act, and his Senate office said that currently the federal government is only required to buy flags that contain 50% American-made materials, but this will require the government to buy flags produced entirely with American-made materials manufactured completely in the United States. So why would anybody care about this? Well, they provided some financial information. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. Census data, in 2015, they say the dollar value of U.S. imports of American flags was $4.4 million.
Ooh.
And of that amount, $4 million worth of the imported flags came from China. They say in 2017, the U.S. imported 10 million American flags, and of those, all but 50,000 came from China. So
Not a good look.
when this takes effect, it's going to change that.
It does seem like that should have been done a while ago, probably, technically. Like, that seems like a real oversight to begin with. Also, that act alone, this is one of those things that probably won't save our nation on its own. That's not going to fix everything. But
This is like here's the thing here. You're right. $4.4 million in the national budget is a drop in the hat. But it's the same thing as maybe like two people paying for an Amazon Prime account, which seems a little
Excessive.
silly if you're in the same house.
good reference. I was going to mention, actually, that it's, in my opinion, it's more of like the concept of the Amazon Prime thing is that we have separate accounts for a reason.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have to see what I get, and I don't have to see what you get.
Okay, who's going to tell them that it doesn't work that way, that you still get to keep your separate login?
We'll talk
when
about
you
this
have
later
it?
on.
Yeah,
This is
we will.
actually obviously an election year thing. Can you think of a better bill for somebody, or to pass for somebody who's running for Senate, than something called the All-American Flag Act that makes sure that all American flags are purchased in America? It is, it's good politics.
It's a move.
It's good politics. It should have already been in the policy, and but it's obviously there's a reason he's doing it in this year. I'm assuming, rather than 2023.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely good timing.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about an update related to Senate candidate Bernie Marino. He made some comments. We're going to go back to our friend Andrew Tobias on this one because he tweeted about this.
Leaning hard on Toby today.
You know, he's always coming through.
He is.
I keep calling them tweets. I know people are starting to say X more now. Posts. I don't know what we call them. Do we call them X's?
It's America. You call them what you want.
Okay, well, Andrew Tobias posted on X, and he said, in an interview with the New York Post, Bernie Marino compared government regulations on abortion to those on alcohol. Here's the quote from Marino from the Post. Is it restricted? Okay, so we can use that same kind of framework to say that after 15 weeks, there's some common sense restrictions. Now, Tobias followed that up with another tweet and said this.
Moreno said something similar in Columbus a couple weeks ago. The train of thought emanates from his quibbling over the word ban, as in banning abortion after 15 weeks into pregnancy with exceptions, as Moreno has proposed.
So I reached out to Marino's team on this and asked why he thinks abortion regulation should be treated like alcohol regulation, or at the very least why he made the comparison. So his campaign told me that his point was having restrictions on abortion after 15 weeks is not a ban, in the same way that restrictions on alcohol use happen, and no one refers to that as an alcohol ban. Now I need you all to bear with me because I want to share some important context about that response. And I apologize if you hear our coworker Lydia Sparra in the background. You're probably just going to hear it because it's an open newsroom.
She's a very loud and wonderful, colorful woman, and we cherish her.
She is boisterous, and we adore her. I'm hoping she heard me, so maybe she'll quiet it down a little bit. But bear with me here. The context I wanted to kind of walk through about this response. So a restriction on alcohol use for people under 21 is a ban for those people. It's illegal to drink alcohol in the United States under 21. The restriction on alcohol use for people over 21, like the blood alcohol content limit for 0.08 in Ohio, that's not a ban. That's more of what we commonly consider a restriction. So if we're just talking definitions here, restricting abortion at 15 weeks bans abortion for most people, almost all people. And here's some data to put that all into context, because most people are not getting abortions due to rape and incest or to save the life of the mother. These are the, quote, common sense restrictions that Marino has referred to that he says he supports after 15 weeks for the general public. So the Guttmacher Institute has done research on this, and less than 1% of abortions are due to rape, and less than 0.5% of abortions are due to incest. It's harder to find the percent of abortions that happen due to saving the life of the mother, partly because doctors say that standard is very vague, what constitutes saving the life of the mother, that sort of thing. So all of that to say, whatever percent that is, that 1.5% of abortions happening due to rape and incest and whatever percent of abortions are happening due to saving the life of the mother, those would be restricted under Marino's policies. Something more like around 90-some% would be effectively banned. So when we're parsing those words, I think that's important context to share with people.
I think also probably one to grow on for the Moreno campaign. And reminder, this is his first office he would hold. So part of it is just probably never try and compare abortion to almost anything, because it's pretty much not going to work out. Don't try and say it's like liquor. Don't compare it to your car dealership. Just let it be its own thing, and it'll probably just be better off in the long run. And I think that's advice for everyone, not just the Moreno campaign.
Yeah, probably don't just make that comparison. Okay, so now we move on to our main topic, which is President Joe Biden stepping aside as the Democratic nominee.
We got here. I jumped the gun early. All right.
You were here with breath bated, I know.
I was, you know
we
that.
are here. I'm tapping your hand because that means it's time to talk about it.
Oh, good. Okay, well, we've got a couple of tweets from Bernie Moreno about this, right?
We do, which we will get to in a second, but first we're going to get to Sherrod.
Oh, good. Let's do that
Brown's
one first.
tweets.
Let's see that one first.
Senator Sherrod Brown actually called for President Joe Biden to step aside as the nominee. This was Friday night, a little after 6 p.m. Here's what he said.
I thank President Biden for his...
That's not the
that's
tweet.
him.
This is the tweet.
I got it.
I agree with the many Ohioans who have reached out to me at this critical time. Our full attention must return to these important issues. I think the president should end his campaign. And then he posted a graphic that had a longer statement, but that was what he posted specifically on X. Now, President Joe Biden tweeted that he was dropping out of the race on Sunday at 1:46 p.m. Eastern time. Now, when we're talking about views on posts, by the way, I just want to point out here, that post from the president was viewed 422.6 million times.
Wow. And half of those were Kamala Harris. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
On all of her burner accounts.
Yeah. So then we got this, though, later on from Sherrod Brown. This is a few minutes after 3 p.m. Eastern, Senator Sherrod Brown on Twitter.
On Sunday.
Yeah, on Sunday. I'm sorry. I call it Twitter, because it's still the Jake.
Okay.
He said, I thank President Biden for his years of committed service to the country we love, as senator, as vice president, and as president.
And we can tell you that Senator Sherrod Brown has endorsed Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. So now we move on to Bernie Moreno's comments related to the president stepping down as a Democratic candidate. He had been calling for Biden to step down since the days following the debate, which was back on June 27th.
That feels like 6 years ago.
It feels so long ago, but also in a weird way, it also feels like it was just a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Because that's been almost a month ago now. It's wild. So Marino's comment on this, which actually we got from an article posted by Joe Ingles of the Statehouse News Bureau.
Make no mistake, Sherrod Brown and San Francisco liberal Kamala Harris could finally pass the extreme liberal agenda they've always wanted. Kamala Harris is even more extreme than Joe Biden. Together with Sherrod Brown, they will stop at nothing to finish their radical agenda.
He had a little bit more to say. He went on to say the Democrats will scramble to change faces, but the American people know all too well the results of their policies. That's why we will defeat Sherrod Brown and Kamala Harris in November. Which brings us to
Is this it?
Joe Ingles.
This is it. So, what does this mean for the Ohio race? Well, who better to tell us than Joe Ingles?
We want to tell you a little bit about Joe Ingles before we get to that conversation. So just so you have a little bit of background on her, she covers politics and Ohio government for the Ohio Public Radio and Television Statehouse News Bureau.
And we had ourselves a nice little chat. Please meet her. Joe, nice to meet you officially. Thank you so much for being on Ohio Has Issues.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, you've been covering politics in Ohio for quite some time. And first of all, thank you for your yeoman's work. We appreciate it. It's not easy to stay up to date on this stuff, as we have learned while trying to produce this show. So, and we pull from reporters like you who are actually down on the front lines and use your work. So we appreciate it. And thanks for keeping people informed. Do people ask you about politics all the time, your friends and family and stuff, like what's going on?
Yes. And,
Pretty
you
awesome.
know, honestly, when I leave here, I try to leave the politics at the door. And
Yes.
so I try not to talk about politics outside of this place. But yes, that's the number one thing everyone wants to talk about.
I'm so sorry you have to go through that. But, you know, if you were a pitcher who had thrown a perfect game or a no hitter, everyone would want to talk to you about that too. So we don't get, sometimes you just get stuck with your lot in life. Now,
No one asks for my macaroni and cheese recipe. It's really irritating.
Is it delicious though? Is it
It
legendary?
is. They all eat it, but yeah.
I'm gonna write that down and I'm gonna get that at the end.
Okay.
Mac and cheese. But before we get to that, you just had an article come out just a couple days ago. It was exploring how President Biden's exit from the race could affect U.S. Senate election here in Ohio. And you talked to some experts. What do the experts have to say as far as what do they consider to be some of the possible positives and negatives for both campaigns based on this news?
Well, I talked to a couple of people in that story. One of them was Brianna Mack. She is the assistant professor of politics and government at Ohio Wesleyan University. I also talked with Mark Caleb Smith, who is a politics and government professor at Cedarville University, poli-sci. And both of them said that they thought that Harris could actually play a role in kind of helping Sherrod Brown a little bit by driving interest at the top of the ticket. Mac told me that she noticed that there's been a change in messaging. And since she said that among the Democrats, and since she said that, I've kind of been looking for it myself. And I have noticed that Democrats are really talking about issues more than candidates or people. They're talking about big issues. And the particular one that she mentioned that I see is this whole idea of saving democracy. She says, you know, they're talking about these issues, trying to get them to resonate with people. And if we look at Ohio, all the polling has shown that Ohioans might feel one way on an issue, but they vote for a candidate that's against the way they feel on that issue. So maybe, and we saw, you know, issue 1 last year, in August it failed, and in November, the abortion issue passed. We saw that people do have thoughts about issues. So maybe that's a way of trying to tap into that more and tie that with the Senate candidate.
And let's talk about downsides for a moment, potential downsides. Do you think that just from what how you've experienced your interactions with them since Joe Biden stepped down, is Bernie Moreno's team in favor of this move? Are they happy about this, do you think? Or do they seem displeased by this? Would they have preferred that Joe Biden stay on the ticket?
Well, they haven't really said much either way to me. But what we have seen on his social media is the minute that Biden stepped down, Bernie Moreno's first post on X was, hey, you know, Kamala Harris is going to be taking over, and the vice president, her policies are a lot like Sherrod Brown's policies. So they're trying to tie Senator Brown with more liberal, more progressive policies. And I think that's one of the strategies that they see in this change.
It did seem like they were all in on the tying him to Biden, tying Biden to Sherrod Brown. And now that was taken away from them. They had to kind of have seen this coming. Do you feel like they were prepared for this, for this eventuality of him actually stepping down? Do you think they did the work to be ready for this instance?
I don't know. That's really hard for me to tell. because I haven't had interactions with the campaign about that. You know, the Moreno campaign, Marino is up in Cleveland, and it's very hard. We get more interaction with Senator Brown because he has routine calls with us and that sort of thing. So it's kind of easier to gauge the Brown side of things right now, but it's very hard to tell. I think, though, that there is an opening there for the Marino campaign to, you know, and they've started down that road of trying to tie Vice President Harris with Brown. And if they can tie on specific issues that are important to Ohioans, that might be successful for them.
Senator Brown's campaign is walking a weird, delicate tightrope with this Joe Biden situation. Obviously, he was originally one of the people who called on him to step down, and then he he gave a pretty terse statement afterwards, but just remarking about how great his work has been and how his leadership's been great and everything. But still, very short. Is there a relationship that you've seen? Do you think this could complicate things? And how is he dealing with the fact that he was one of the people who helped precipitate this happening?
Well, you know, if you look at Senator Brown, he was one of the very last Democrats in the Senate to call for President Biden to step aside. So, I mean, there was a lot of loyalty there up until the very end. But I think a lot of Democrats over the past month since that debate have really questioned whether Biden could win against former President Trump. And I think that was the key issue is they were, you know, regardless of what they thought about President Biden, and I think a lot of them really believed President Biden was doing a great job, they questioned whether he could do well enough in the campaign, and they see this as a very pivotal campaign because it not only determines the presidency, but it determines, you know, the direction of the Supreme Court, for example. It determines a lot of policy and a lot of things that could make a lot of difference for a very long time.
Now, regardless, if Donald Trump ends up being the candidate, regardless of who he's up against, whether that would have been Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, based on recent voting history here in Ohio, all signs point to indicate that he's going to win comfortably, most likely anyways, if that holds true based on history. We used to be more of a bellwether, and now recently we've made more of a move towards the red. My question is, if it really doesn't matter because he would have won either way, probably Donald Trump would have, at a presidential level, why is this meaningful to Ohioans that Joe Biden has stepped down as the presidential nominee? How could this affect us in Ohio?
Turnout. Democratic turnout is key. We have seen in recent years that in your area, up in Cleveland, we've seen Cleveland Democrats who haven't shown up at the polls. And that has given the opportunity for Republicans to be successful up there. So if if Vice President Harris is able to generate excitement and able to get Democrats who were not planning to participate to come out to the polls, that could make a difference. Here's the other thing. As you pointed out, nationally, we're kind of seen as a red state now versus the swing state we were maybe 8-10 years ago. And for that reason, it was well thought by a lot of political strategists that the national Democrats wouldn't put much effort into Ohio because they saw that they could get to the White House without having Ohio. However, if the case is changing, if there's excitement in Ohio, if it looks like we're going to have a ballot measure, an amendment in November that would change the redistricting process, if that takes hold and it's getting a lot of people energized, there are a lot of things that could happen. And if a lot of money comes into Ohio, that could change this thinking about the Trump trajectory.
You also had a piece out just talking about some of the reactions from Ohio politicians to Joe Biden deciding to step down from his election. First of all, what are you hearing from the Republicans? Any surprises? Anything stand out to you?
They say they want the president to step down now. They're not, they say, well, we don't want to wait till the end of the year. If he's not capable of running, he should step out now. That's what's coming from the Republicans. From the Democrats, we're hearing a lot of them get on board saying, thank you to President Biden for his work, and also saying that they're getting behind Vice President Harris. And I have not heard anyone at the Statehouse who has not said that they're behind Vice President Harris, actually.
Speaking of, even Governor DeWine had some nice things to say to President Biden as based on his decision. Did that surprise you at all? I mean, he's usually fairly cordial, but it really does stand in stark contrast to a lot of his other party members these days.
Well, yeah, and it did not surprise me at all. I kind of expected that he would have nice things to say about President Biden, because look at what he's been through with President Biden. He's had to deal with President Biden in a pandemic. He's had to deal with the train derailment. President Biden stepping in on that. A bunch of, we've had all kinds of problems with natural disasters here in Ohio that he's worked with the federal government on. He's worked with the federal government on a lot of different fronts, and President Biden on those things. And, the other thing about Governor DeWine, he's not worried about running for governor again. So he can kind of go out and say what he thinks without, a retribution of that.
There's a shameful lack of polling in this Senate race, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes,
I'm assuming
I agree.
there hasn't been any some polling since the switch has been made. Is that correct?
I saw one that I don't trust, so I'm not going to say anything about it. I agree with you. The polling has been abysmal. And I just don't think that they're polling in Ohio in this race. Maybe they'll start polling, in the future, but right now I'm not seeing much that I can trust.
I'm used to seeing some Ohio politicians drop the ball, but with the national importance of the Senate race, I can't believe that just nationally, national Democrats aren't seeing the importance, or national Republicans aren't seeing the importance and funding this race in a way that would benefit them more, and funding polling more than anything to find out where we stand. Why do you think there isn't that sort of polling?
Well, I can only, I don't know. I haven't talked to anyone who specifically said, here's why we're doing this or making these decisions, but I can tell you that I'm hearing from friends in other states right now. And nationally, the Democrats have kind of given up on Ohio. They think it's a lost cause. It's a red state. And they see that they can win the White House without Ohio. And as far as Sherrod Brown, there's still money coming in nationally from other places for him, but they also think that they can make up the deficit in the Senate even if he loses. So there's kind of in the back of the minds of a lot of people outside Ohio, there's a path to victory that doesn't involve investing money here. And if they think that there's not going to be a return on that investment, they're less likely to care about it.
Okay, Joe, anything else you're keeping your eye on right now in the Senate race or politically that you're writing about, maybe?
Well, one thing I'm looking for, and I've been around for a while, so I remember covering the Ohio Supreme Court race back when Alice Roby Resnick was a justice and was running for re-election. And she basically, there was a very tough campaign against her by the business community. And they attacked her credibility. They attacked her ability to be a fair justice. And when the vote came out, Ohio voters did not buy into that. Even though there was a ton of money spent against her, she won re-election. And if you look at the whole idea of how, now that's been 20 years ago, so thinking has changed. People treat people differently in social media world that we didn't have back then. There's a lot of things that have changed. But, there's also the fact that, Vice President Harris is a woman. And there may be dynamics there that we are not thinking about right now. And it could be that if there's too much of a pushback against her in a certain way, it could be perceived as sexist or racist or whatever by voters. Even, like Ohio voters could even think, hey, this is too much. And that if that happens, it could go down the ticket.
It is truly uncharted territory, and the one thing that's true that we all can agree on is that anyone who says that they know what's going to happen next is full of it. They just don't.
That's right. That's right. I totally agree.
Before I let you go, Joe, give me, I won't ask for the whole recipe because I don't want to betray your trust, but what's the secret ingredient, the one thing to your mac and cheese that really makes it sing?
Okay, you put more cheese in it than you do macaroni.
There you go. That's the most
Yeah.
American recipe I've ever heard.
Lots of cheese and bake it, make it nice and bubbly.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for all your work. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. She was delightful. And she's their senior reporter, by the way, we should have mentioned that. And also, she is the producer and host of the Ohio Statehouse Scoop podcast, which we listen to and steal from liberally. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Joe.
We look forward to her coming back and, so we can feel just a little more above board about it.
And just one special tease, she actually emailed us after that interview today, and she did send us her world-famous mac and cheese recipe. And if you stick with us till the end of this show, then you're going to get it, and it looks delicious, folks.
She had me at more cheese and macaroni, I'm just saying.
Boom.
Okay, so we can tell you that here in Ohio, the Legislative Black Caucus has endorsed Kamala Harris for the Democratic presidential nominee, and we did get a statement from them.
We believe that Vice President Harris is outstandingly qualified to lead our nation forward, building on the progress we have made in addressing the challenges that lie ahead.
They went on to say her historic candidacy as the first Black and South Asian woman to seek the office of president reflects the diversity and strength of our country.
And then, we are confident in her ability to unite and inspire the American people and to continue the work of creating a more just and equitable society.
Okay, so we know that Vice President Harris is the presumptive Democratic nominee now. We also know something's got to happen in order for her to officially become the nominee.
Yeah, how's that work?
Well, we talked with an expert about it. We talked with Ohio State University Morris College of Law. You think I would be able I went there for a year. It's such a tongue twister. Okay, the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, election law director, Professor Edward Foley. Here's what he said. All right, Professor Foley, thank you very much for being with us here on Ohio Has Issues. We appreciate your time.
Good to be with you.
Now, I want to start by asking you for a little bit of background because there's a lot of conversation happening now with President Joe Biden stepping aside and now Kamala Harris being talked about as the presumptive nominee. Can we just take it back and talk about open conventions and how this worked prior to the 1950s to actually have the candidate?
Sure. So for most of American history, as you say, up until the 1950s or 1960s, primaries really weren't important, especially in presidential elections. The two major party candidates were determined at these party conventions in the summertime, and the parties themselves selected their delegates. I mean, because these were national conventions, it was a kind of a pyramid process where the state parties would send delegates to the national convention, and then local parties would send delegates to the state convention. So it would work up the geographic pyramid, if you will, to figure out who was going to be at the national convention. And then whoever got the votes at the convention would be the nominee.
Okay, so now in this current system that we have primary elections. We just had one here in March in Ohio. President Joe Biden won the Democratic primary. So how does that work now? How can Ohio delegates, for example, now vote for someone else, assuming that will be Vice President Kamala Harris rather than Joe Biden?
Yeah, so we colloquially say that Biden won the March primary. That's a terminology we always use, but it's legally more complicated than that because in presidential election, I mean, in other primaries for governor or senator, primaries really do choose the nominee. If you vote in the Democratic Party primary for your favorite candidate for senator, that's the person, and that person wins. They're going to be on the ballot in Ohio in the fall. But presidential elections are this national process. So the winner of the Ohio primary isn't necessarily going to win in the convention. You're right that the winner of the Ohio primary is going to affect the delegates from Ohio who go to the convention, but there's no guarantee that the delegates are going to end up voting for the winning candidate. Now, we do have this system because of party rules, not state law, but party rules, that the delegates are supposed to vote for the candidate that they're associated with at the time of the primary. So that's why we kind of fall into the language of saying Biden won the primary, thinking that, well, the the voters voted their preference for Biden, meaning legally delegates associated with Biden go to the convention from Ohio. But it's not locked in that they actually vote for Biden in the convention. And especially if Biden vote drops out, they have to vote for somebody who isn't going to be Biden if he's no longer in the race.
So it's incredibly quite nuanced, as you're saying here. The Democratic National Committee isn't actually tied to primary election results. Is that what I'm hearing you say? The delegates actually can make a choice at the convention?
So the key point in all of this is the party itself has rules that govern the party. The party is an association of its members and under the Constitution, the First Amendment, they have a constitutional right to govern themselves as they see fit. And the U.S. Supreme Court in several cases, including some from Ohio, have affirmed that constitutional right of the parties. Parties don't have to use primaries if they don't want to. People have heard of caucuses. And sometimes that seems similar to a primary, but a caucus is solely operated by the party. A primary election is run by the state on behalf of the party, but the party gets to say what it wants to do with the results of the primary. So parties' rules control all of this. The Democratic Party happens to have a rule that's called the Good Conscience Clause, which says that delegates should, in good conscience, act on behalf of the voters who elected them as delegates, and so should try to act on behalf of the delegates. And again, that usually means voting for the candidate that the voters wanted in the primary. So you could say, as long as Biden is in, at the time that Biden was in the race, you could say that the delegates from Ohio who voted for him should, in good conscience, vote for Biden, unless some new information caused them to think that in good conscience, their own voters might want them to reassess the situation. Now, if there had been a fight at the convention between Biden and somebody else, the delegates would have had to decide what their conscience required them to do in that situation. But once Biden said he wasn't going to run anymore, the delegates are still bound in good conscience to do what their voters want, but voting for Biden isn't an option anymore.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. We have seen reports that Vice President Kamala Harris has secured enough support among the delegates to get the nomination at the Democratic National Convention. But there have been some Republicans who have said very loudly that they plan to challenge the fact that Kamala Harris may get the Democratic nomination. Is there anything for Democrats to be concerned about there?
No, it's a meaningless argument. Maybe it's done for political effect, but it has no legal basis to it. Again, the parties get to decide how they're going to choose their nominee according to their own rules. The Republicans have no say whatsoever in how the Democrats choose to govern themselves as Democrats, and vice versa, by the way. Democrats aren't allowed to interfere with what the Republicans do in terms of picking their nominee. The only remotely relevant issue is the question of deadlines that state law has for putting the names of candidates on the November general election ballot. But those deadlines, while there was some talk, especially here in Ohio, about whether the Democrats were holding their convention too late in relationship to the Ohio's rules, that's all been cleared up and won't really be a problem.
Okay, that was actually part of my next question for you, because that issue has been cleared up in Ohio. The Democratic National Convention is happening, mid to late August. That deadline's been pushed back in Ohio. It's now September 1st, so no issue there. My final question for you before I let you go here as we have this conversation, which is just fascinating. Is there any reason legally that we would not see a VP announcement prior to her official nomination? Any idea when we might expect that legally?
So normally the vice presidential nomination is made official at the convention. And you have to go back far in American history for when there would be party fights over who the vice president was, excuse me, contrary to the desire of the top of the ticket. The practice has evolved quite settled in both parties that whoever is the presidential nominee gets to pick the vice presidential nominee, and the party convention ratifies that. So trying to apply that basic concept to this very unusual year that we have now with President Biden stepping aside, I think you still have to assume that the party is going to let Harris, now that she's going to become, for all intents and purposes, the presidential nominee, she gets to pick her running mate, just the way others have gotten to pick their running mate. And if she picks her running mate before the convention, then that virtual roll call can settle that officially at the same time as it settles officially her own nomination.
Okay. All right. Great insight from you, Professor Foley. We really appreciate you helping us clear up what is an unprecedented time here in American politics. Thanks for being with us on Ohio Has Issues.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thank you.
Many thanks to Professor Foley for kind of clearing up how the convention can work and what it means when, you truly do not have the option of voting for the person who was the subject of the primary here in Ohio and many other states.
It's quite useful. Now, here's what we do know. We know that Kamala Harris is the presumptive nominee, and we know that she has enough delegate support right now to get the party nomination.
So Ohio Has Issues did have a proud moment. We obtained the DNC rules memo, and that was something that was voted on today. So if you are a politics nerd, I do recommend you can go to the DNC YouTube page. You can watch where that happened, where they kind of talked about this process and
Treat
the rules
yourself.
that'll be used. Yeah, when you're having like a casual Sunday afternoon. So they voted on the framework that needs to be in place that would give an opportunity for candidates to file for consideration. A lot of people have said this process needs to be open, it needs to be transparent, there needs to be opportunity. So in the rules that were voted on today, there is an opportunity actually for other people, should they want to. It's not that we've foreseen this or kind of anticipate this happening, but if someone wanted to, they could file candidacy to put their name in the hat, so to speak, to be the Democratic nominee at the convention.
That's fun.
Yeah, so here are some more facts that we know. The Democratic National Committee feels that the president's withdrawal from the race means it's more important than ever that the Democratic Party convene a virtual roll call. So we know this is happening via virtual roll call. It'll be in advance of the in-person convention. That's happening in Chicago, August 19th through the 22nd. This is something they're doing to meet ballot deadlines across the country.
You remember that Ohio had that particular issue, and a bunch of other states and stuff, and so that does put things into question a little bit there, but they're figuring it out, folks. Everyone relax. DNC has heard from Democrats that this process must be open, transparent, and fair. They also acknowledge the need to quickly select a nominee just over 100 days until the election.
Just over 100 days away, which is wild to think about. So they say that this can all be accomplished through an electronic voting process, which is something that they used during the pandemic, so it's not something that's completely new to them. And here is the punchline, folks. The DNC says they will deliver a Democratic presidential nominee officially nominated and confirmed to the American people by August 7th.
The DNC and the DNCC worked in close collaboration with the Convention Rules Committee on a framework for the nominating process, which will incorporate an electronic voting system to ensure we will meet these deadlines. They're using an electronic voting system. That's good.
Yeah. So, in case you didn't
This is again
catch
from this is their plan.
Electronic voting system. That's what they're planning to use. So yes, it will be the virtual roll call. There were questions about whether that would happen. That's what it'll be. So the Rules Committee is co-chaired by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Bishop Leah Doctrey. And that was that meeting that I told you about. That happened at 2 p.m. Eastern today on Wednesday, July 24th. So you can catch that on the YouTube page.
And we have a couple of quotes now from the DNC chair first. This is DNC Chair Jamie Harrison. The work ahead may be unprecedented, but we are prepared to undertake a transparent, swift, and orderly process to move forward as a united Democratic Party with a nominee who represents our values, upholds our truths, and has the wisdom to carry us forward in this fight. Because, folks, let me be clear, we remain laser focused on winning in November.
Jamie Harrison went on to say, we have faced challenges before and come out stronger on the other side. We have the experience and expertise in running successful conventions and nominating processes. And I have complete confidence in our party to meet this moment. We can and will be both fast and fair as we execute this nomination.
And here's a quote from the DNCC chair, Minion Moore. Quote, this will all be done swiftly and transparently so our delegates, party members, and the public understand the process. And by executing this process swiftly and effectively, we will bring our party together as we head to the convention in Chicago united and position the Democratic ticket to win in November. So, no surprises there, saying all the things you would expect them to say after this.
So that's it for our conversation this week about how this all impacts the Ohio state, basically how it impacts delegates here in the state of Ohio to the Democratic National Convention, and how it impacts the Ohio Senate race.
I do feel like there was a dry period a couple months ago when we were doing, in this lead up to the election that we're doing. Reminder, we're doing this all the way up to the election, folks, every week.
About 100 more days.
And where it was a little dry. It was getting a little, no, I would just say like there wasn't a lot of action, you know, going on because things were just, you know, just like kind of chill. That's not the case anymore. Things are nuts now, folks. And if you want to know what's going on in Ohio politics, don't, first of all, please go to check out all the work of the people who are guests on the show regularly. We appreciate you, including our guests today. And also, come back to Ohio Has Issues.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. Next week, we're going to be kind of bringing you your Voter 411 guide. So we'll have kind of all kinds of information that you need to know as a voter here in the state of Ohio.
What more could you want? Thanks for watching, everybody.
Don't go anywhere yet.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Oh,
because
my gosh.
we have for you.
I almost forgot the best part.
We need Beebs to bring it in right now.
Yeah, let's bring it in.
Let's put a little music under this
Yes,
thing.
we've got the actual recipe here, folks. This was promised by Joe Ingles earlier on the show. Now, this is not, she made it clear, this is not her recipe technically. This is her mother's recipe. This is her mother Junie's delicious mac and cheese. And we're just gonna go through these ingredients with you folks. And again, thanks for watching. Ingredients: 2 1-pound boxes of macaroni, 1 stick of butter,
A whole stick.
8 cups of shredded cheese. She says that this is, you can do it how you want, but Joe likes to do a combo of Colby cheddar, American, and mozzarella. But it really can be anything. 1 can of evaporated milk, which still is a very confusing product to me. 1 cup of heavy cream. Don't go light on it. Here are the directions. Once you get all that, you got all that good stuff together. First, you preheat that oven to 350, everybody.
Nice and hot.
Now you're going to want to boil those 2 1-pound packages of macaroni. Simple enough. I can do that. You're going to throw that hot macaroni into a mixing bowl with 1 stick of butter. Not icky margarine. Don't do it, folks. You're better than that. Real butter.
The real stuff.
That's Junie's way. Add salt and pepper. Okay, now you're going to spray a large casserole dish. She doesn't say the size. Just go with your heart. Depending on the size of your dishes, you might want to have enough for 2 dishes. You know, you never know.
You
Live your
could
life.
freeze one that way.
And
if it's
also,
too much.
if you make it a little thinner, you get more crust, because everybody likes that crust, you know. Now you put a thin layer of macaroni in the bottom of the dish. You cover that with an equal amount of shredded cheese. Don't be shy or skimp on this. Continue to alternate layers, but make sure you use your last layer for cheese. That's got to be cheese. And make sure you have more cheese than macaroni, obviously. Now, what you're going to want to do is you pour that mysterious evaporated milk evenly over the top of it. And then you pour the heavy cream on top of that.
Interesting.
And then you cover there's always a process like that that is important that I always overlook. Cover the casserole with foil that's been sprayed with non-stick spray. Put the casserole on a baking sheet. Then pop it into the oven. You're going to want to bake that for 30 minutes. Pull it out, check and see if it's bubbling on top. This will depend obviously on the type of dish you use, so it might take longer to get this consistency. Once it's bubbling on the top, remove the foil and bake for 10 to 15 minutes longer. You want the top to be lightly brown with just a bit of crunch brownness around that. Very specific. Very specific at the end. Thank you, Junie.
I like some crunch on the top of my mac and cheese.
And then you just got to play it by ear, though. She says you got to eyeball this. And one last note, she says it is best if you let it sit for a few minutes before serving to let the cheese do its magic, and probably safest.
I think so too. Yeah, save those taste buds because you're going to taste all of that. Also, Joe did say that she recommends making this special dish, not an every night thing, because it is delectable.
Yeah, you'd die, folks. You'd die. But you'd be happy. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching Ohio Has Issues. Hope you screen grab this and enjoy the rest of your night.
We'll see you back next week.